Hello and welcome. You're watching Business Plus. I'm Shweta Kothari. We're bringing you stories from the world of business policy and economy. First up, let's begin with headlines. India will be the world's third largest economy by 2030, according to global ratings agency S&P, has an opportunity to become a global manufacturing hub. And amid an ongoing cash crunch, Byju Raveendran, said to have infused 4,000 crore rupees of his own money in the company, pledges personal property to keep the firm afloat. Online gaming companies get 71 GST notices. Authorities detect GST evasion of 1.51 lakh crore till October. And Apple, unhappy with C-type charger rule, says Make in India plans may hit a roadblock if Indian government pushes for universal charging port. Go First lessors push back, take the resolution professional to the court for not providing records related to aircraft maintenance and blocking lessors to physically inspect aircrafts. Priyanka Chopra becomes the latest victim of deepfake menace, even as Indian government pushes the button on AI regulations and warns social media companies to take down AI manipulated content. All those stories right here on Newsline. With me is Karthik Malhotra as usual. Karthik, hi, good morning.
Morning, Shweta.
Well, talking about India's progress, prowess, and day on day, one rating agency on the other says India is likely to be the third largest economy. In fact, S&P now reaffirming that if India continues to grow at 7% and above, third largest economy by 2030.
I know. I think 2030 is still, a long distance away, Shweta, and I believe that the 5 trillion mark, given that we are at about 3.75 trillion already, we will arrive at that 5 trillion magic hype number of 5 trillion. I don't know if it is a big enough number to celebrate, but we would be the third largest economy exceeding the 5 trillion mark much sooner than 2030. And multiple other rating agencies, multiple other reports have reaffirmed that even if you continue to grow at about 7%, 7.2%, then in the next 3 years, FY28 or so is when we would reach that $5 trillion mark. But again, I think the fundamental question there is 5 trillion good enough? Given that we are the fastest growing major economy and the most populous country in the world, and the fact that our unemployment rate continues to hover around the double-digit mark, excess of 9% for the last 3 months, then this jobless growth is what I think India should get up and worry about, as opposed to being the third largest. I mean, it's okay to be number 3 in a class where the number 1 and number 2 in any case are miles ahead of you, and number 4 and number 5 are degrowing. So Japan and Germany have not been able to keep pace because of their aging population and because of manufacturing, which was their calling card, moving away to China. The fact that you have laggards and you have economies which are floundering, unable to find their feet, I think the celebration of being the third largest on the back of other economies not doing as well should not really be a case of celebration. But having said that, of course, I think we will have to take it 1 year at a time, every quarter, in one instance. And if you're able to keep up with this growth momentum, and what S&P has also mentioned, which I agree with, that India has to prove its own manufacturing prowess and establish itself as a great alternative to China in becoming the manufacturing hub of the world. And only if that manufacturing starts happening in India at scale, and not just to feed the domestic demand, but also cater to international demand, that is when I think we would make some headway when it comes to real growth.
All right. So I have 2 questions for you. First, to begin with, not just S&P, CLSA also says that India is going to be the largest economy by 2047.
2052.
252 to 47. So a couple of decades from now at $45 trillion. Do these numbers mean anything to the common person who's listening to this bulletin right now? When we talk about joblessness, that's on a high at 9% and above for the last 3 months, as you rightly pointed out. A number of other factors that are not really working for people. Inflation, it's still under RBI's, RBI's tolerance limit, intolerance band, but still very high for a lot of people who would be buying, let's say, vegetable on a daily basis. What do these numbers really mean for the common man?
Sure.
What is the challenge that they are looking at, and are those challenges being catered to by the government?
Let's look at one factor at a time. If you talk about inflation, I think inflation is always cyclical, and if it doesn't happen in cycles during a year, it does happen in cycles over a period of time. So in a span of 10 years, you would on an average have at least 4 cycles of high inflation, and that is what India and the rest of the world is battling right now. So what do you do when you're faced with high inflation? Obviously, there are some fiscal measures which are not very accurate in taming inflation. Monetary measures like tightening and increasing rates is what the RBI and other central banks in the world have done. So that is an immediate knee-jerk reaction to tame inflation and not let the inflation pinch the common man. So inflation is going to be cyclical, and economies around the world, including India, cannot shy away from inflation hitting them and tackling inflation using whatever matrices and whatever measures required to tame inflation. Now, on the other hand, you're right. I think we've got to not look at the GDP number as a whole, but look at GDP divided by the population, per capita GDP. Given that you are at $3.7 trillion, housing the world's largest number of people, you have a very small per capita GDP. Compare that with Japan and compare that with Germany, which are right now number 3 and number 4 in the pecking order. While their absolute number, given the size of the country and given the size of the population, if the number is still, in the realm of about $4.5 trillion, divide that by the population, they have a much higher per capita GDP. So I think India has to look at itself on the basis of per capita GDP, and that is where China has done much better than India. Up until April this year, China was the world's most populous country and has continued to be the second largest economy in size. So you are at a value of about $18 trillion or so of economy size, and that makes sense on a per capita level as well. So at 5 trillion, India is not going to cut it on the per capita GDP.
And even per capita GDP, as many analysts would say right now, is a function of averages. And it doesn't really matter in a country where 99% of the wealth is controlled by 1% of the people. So it does not really mean that each of these people are getting equal money. It essentially means you're coming at averages.
But Shweta, then that sort of, brings you back to this capitalism versus socialism debate. So do you want to continue being a hardcore capitalist country where you allow businesses to flourish and you allow businesses to profit and contribute back to both job creation, capital investment, as well as adding taxes back to the economy, etc. So that is the capitalist way of looking at it. And in that scenario, there is going to be some disparity. How wide that disparity, again, I think depends on what are the policies in place to either try to tame it or let free markets flourish. Now, if you were to take a socialist stand, then providing that enabling environment to companies to flourish, to reduce or to add to equitable growth or reduce this disparity is not going to be fair to corporate India as well. But then, of course, I think employment is something that you have to tackle, as the first priority. In addition to that, per capita income, which again is a function of how much revenue the government is generating versus the cost that the government is incurring on account of either infrastructure development or any other, social scheme that the government wants to outlay. So you've got to look at employment, you've got to look at per capita income, and you've got to look at per capita GDP. I think if you're able to make headway on these three parameters, then a 5 trillion or a 7 trillion or a 35 trillion or a 45 trillion by 2052 will make sense. But I think these headlines are going to come every day, and while it's good to celebrate that $5 trillion mark, and there were some fake headlines also sometime back that India has already reached the $4 trillion mark, etc., which hopefully we should reach by end of this financial year, and that data should come out maybe in the month of June or July next year. But I think celebration of a benchmark of a headline 5 trillion is great. Ideally, India should have been at 5 trillion in 2022. But then you had a black swan event like COVID in between, right? Yes. So I think 5 trillion is a good number, a wow number. It takes you up in the report card in the ranking of countries around the world. But then at 5 trillion, you don't cut it on other parameters like per capita income, per capita GDP. And of course, if all this growth is happening on account of almost double-digit unemployment, then it's a serious challenge.
Absolutely. So perhaps a longer sort of period needed for a sustained growth, and that would bring us on the chart of a country that's doing not just well in a parameter division, but also when it comes to per capita income and per capita GDP. But moving away to a story that is unabated and continues to take all the headlines, and that is with Byju Raveendran. A day after news floating of Byju Raveendran pledging his own home to pay up the salaries of 15,000 employees was still awaiting, by the way, their November dues. It now appears that he has, in fact, already over a period of month invested over 4,000 crore rupees of his own money to keep the firm afloat. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, okay, sure. He has pledged his homes, and that has happened just 2 days back. But then, of course, infusing his own money into taking care of immediate expenses of the firm great. Yeah, one tick mark to all the wrongs and all the crosses that Byju Raveendran has been facing. So I think for the first time in many weeks, perhaps, if not in public, then at least in a small group of people, Byju Raveendran has come out of his shell and spoken. And he has listed out to the top management at Byju's the challenges and the 5 priority areas. Right. Now, look at the pecking order of those, and those challenges, and that priority list also goes on to reaffirm the challenges that Byju's is facing. So, what is on Byju Raveendran's priority list? To begin with, number one, I think what is haunting and giving Byju Raveendran sleepless nights, and rightly so, is the $1.2 billion term loan B. So his immediate priority, and he's in his, in what has been reported, he's really speaking like a war leader, and he's used terms like, there's a multi-frontal war against him, and he's really feeling like a war leader right now, and he has to emerge out of that scenario victorious as a warrior, right? So number one priority for him right now, and you'll see how grave these challenges are. Number one is the $1.2 billion term loan B. That is haunting him. Number two on his pecking order, on his priority list, is the money laundering case against him by the enforcement director, charging him with violation of FEMA. Number three is the audited results of FY23, which in any case were to be out by this time, December 2023. We should have seen 18 months later, but still at least 18 months later, we should have seen those financial audits for FY23. So that is number 3 on his priority list. Number 4 for him is the Davidson Kempner loan of $400 million, which has now been repaid by Ranjan Pai. And Ranjan Pai now taking stake. He is bullish that because this loan was taken for Akash, and now is the admission season apparently kicking in the next quarter or so, there should be better revenues showing up for Akash. So then repayment of that loan, it seems repayment of that loan now not to Davidson Kempner, but to Ranjan Pai seems to be number 4 on his priority list. And number 5 finally is a path to profitability at a group level. So the 2,300 crore rupees worth of losses which were reported in FY22, that data came out in November 2023. Those losses need to be hemmed in, and some sort of a path to profitability at a group level. So these are 5 wars, 5 fronts that Byju Raveendran and the parent company Think and Learn is fighting right now on, and that's the priority list given by Byju Raveendran. All
right, and priority list also includes, of course, paying back loans, but in the immediate run, it appears that the company would need about 300 to 400 crore rupees to pay back, not just to their lenders, but also to BCCI, because that's again a problem with NCLT right now, where NCLT would be looking at whether to put Byju's in insolvency or not. That's the BCCI plea.
Yeah, absolutely. So BCCI has gone to NCLT Bengaluru and has put in an application to admit Byju's Think and Learn into insolvency because it owes about 158 crore rupees to BCCI. And now, obviously, this advertising contract that Byju's had taken up 3 years ago, if the company had decided that it does not want to continue with that, it could have very well used the time which was available in their favor. And even if you can't get out of that contract, perhaps sublease it, find ways, discuss with BCCI, discuss with other potential advertisers, marketing agencies, advertising agencies across the board, and say that I've got inventory worth 158 crore to burn, and I'm willing to sell it to you at a discount of, let's say, 150 crores or 100 crores, as the negotiation would have, thrown up a number, and gotten away from this messy situation it finds itself in. So Byju Raveendran also says that the next 60 to 90 days, 2 to 3 months, is when there should be some sort of an infusion of about 400 crore rupees or so, which should help the company deal with its immediate cash flow challenges and expenses that it has to incur to stay afloat and retain the people who are there, retain those very few office spaces which are left, and continue doing business. There are operational expenses to incur if you are not insolvent and if you're in the business of running a business.
Yeah, so interestingly, 3 to 4 months is when Byju's is thinking of reviving itself. That's the timeline it has given to itself. Byju Raveendran, however, is not going away. So despite calls from various sections of, onlookers, watchers, experts, Byju Raveendran not likely to step down anytime soon.
I mean,
he is a founder.
He
will continue
to say that he is fighting. He is feeling like a war leader. He is feeling like he's the chief, and there is his entire infantry which is fighting 5 battles.
His commentary does not hint at somebody who is giving up anytime soon. So that is, of course, as far as Byju's is concerned. But another sector, industry, that continues to be under hammer of the GST authority is the online gaming sector, which has now received 71, the industry has received 71 GST notices to the tune of 1.1 lakh crore rupees as of October. What's happening? What are these GST dues all about?
So, Shweta, I think, we had also done a calculation of a similar format. This number of 1.12 lakh crore rupees was mentioned in Parliament by MOS Finance, Mr. Priyanka Chopra, and 71 notices amounting to 1.12 lakh crore, and according to one of the publications, another 20 to 30 notices yet to be served. So, we are definitely looking at, in the month of November. So, we are definitely looking at a much larger number than 1.12 lakh crore rupees. Now, the biggest hit of this receiver of the biggest blow of this comes to a company called Games 24/7, which runs games like Rummy and Poker, etc. online. 20,000 crore rupees is slapped just on that one company, Games 24/7. Now, obviously, these challenges are grave, and we've been discussing them for months now. I think the 50th GST Council meet is when the government issued what it called a clarification and not a change in GST rules. And what was this clarification? The clarification was that online games, betting, casino, horse racing, etc. is all one single industry, and all of them are going to be taxed at 28% of face value. What were online gaming companies paying until then? Online gaming companies were paying 18% GST, not 28% GST, 18% GST, not on face value, but on the platform fee. So, primarily what this really means is that if there was 100 rupees on the table, if 100 rupees was parked by a gamer onto a platform, government says pay 28 rupees as GST. What the gaming platforms were doing was that if 100 rupees is coming onto the platform, they would take 10 rupees as platform fee and let the gamer play with 90 rupees. Now, that 10 rupees, they would pay a 18% tax on that 10 rupees, which was 1.8 rupees. So, 1 rupee 80 paisa of taxes paid since 2017 versus the demand for 28 rupees is obviously, I mean, in multiples, it is a huge delta which gaming companies have to now cough out.
You know, one of my, and I think concerns of the online gaming players as well is that it's been very long now. We've been discussing this for months and months, and gaming companies are taking GST authority to court saying that we cannot pay up this amount, which essentially means that the case is likely to continue in the court of law for a very long time. Can't the authorities sit with gaming platforms on a table and decide on what is mutually accepted?
No, I think a lot of those discussions have happened, Shweta. And if you remember that period between the 50th and the 51st GST Council meet, that entire period of 1 month or so was actually dedicated to a lot of industry talks. And in fact, you had MOS IT Rajiv Chandrasekhar also hinting at that point that some sort of an amicable agreement negotiation would be arrived at. It was never arrived at, right? It was not arrived at. And the 51st GST Council meet only reaffirmed the clarification of the 50 GST Council meet that we are charging you 28% on face value, like it or not. Now, of course, litigation is always an option, and litigation is what we are seeing right now. But I think you're right, it will be at least a few months, if not years, before it goes to one court, it gets challenged. If there is a verdict in favor of either party, the other party challenging it, going to a higher court. So I think all of that is likely to play out over time. But the fact of the matter is that now the gaming companies are also saying that why not put a regulator in place for us? If you think that we are evading tax and if you're not doing business fairly, then instead of the SRO, which is a self-regulatory organization, put a SEBI-like regulator in place and let the regulator come and see whether we are following the code of conduct, whether we are doing our business correctly or not. Now, all of that is also again happening on the back of investments in the gaming sector dwindling. So this was once supposed to be a sunshine sector. It was supposed to be a $4 billion worth industry, and those investments ever since April this year have actually been reduced to a trickle and hardly any fresh funds coming into the gaming sector. So I think with this GST, call it retrospective or call it a clarification or call it whatever you may, but with this demand of 1 trillion rupees plus of GST, how many of these companies are going to remain solvent is another question that the government should think about, because there is, of course, employment and there is investment which is coming into or through this sector. So I think government has to see that that 1 trillion rupees worth of compromise or so may be negotiated, and you should be in a position to let these companies flourish if they are following the law and if they are operating legally, and maybe let them not pay this or all of this retrospectively, and the changes or whatever the clarification could now be extended and implemented only from a certain date and not all the way back to 2017.
Absolutely. And online gaming companies and the government will remain at loggerheads while they get 71 GST notices. Many of these companies, remember, have taken GST authority to court, where the matter is likely to be heard even maybe in the next couple of weeks or months or so. But at this point, GST dues to the tune of 1.12 lakh crore rupees. That is what the gaming sector is staring at. But shifting focus now to a story that is coming by the way of Apple, and EU has now mandated Apple to come out with universal charging ports. Apple is not very happy about it, and with Indian government also likely to follow suit, and that's the new story coming in, that Indian government may push Apple for a universal charging port, which is the Type-C charging port, which perhaps is universally used not just to charge your phones but also your laptops and other devices. Apple says if you ask us to make these changes now, it will hurt the Make in India plans and the Make in India story that is unfolding for Apple right now.
Yeah, Shweta. So I think the EU had come out with this ruling about almost a year back. This discussion was on, and at least 6-7 months ago, EU had implemented this rule that all smartphones, not just Apple, all smartphones out there need to have a single charging type. And after studies that were conducted, it was found that the Type-C charger, or also referred to as the USB-C, is actually the best option to have, because most number of mobile phones, smartphones use that charger anyway and use that port anyway. So it would be in the interest of consumers to have a single charger, and because also Apple and then every other smartphone maker, premium smartphone maker followed suit, with a new device they would not give you a charger, a wall socket at least, right? They would just give you the charging cable. So overall, the EU's estimate suggested that about $271 million would be saved by consumers if different devices did not have different charging ports. Now, it had mandated Apple to comply, and all of Apple's upcoming devices should use the USB-C. So Apple did comply, and the iPhone 15 incidentally happens to use the Type-C.
But complying with that order means changing the charging port in all of Apple's upcoming devices.
So now that is the challenge. I think upcoming is not a problem. Apple's problem is, and India followed suit incidentally. So India said that, yeah, I think EU's suggestion is great, and it's not just helping consumers save money, but it is also reducing the e-waste. You don't need so many cables, and so every time you change your phone, what do you do with the charger and what do you do with the cable? So it'll also reduce e-waste, and hence let's follow EU. And EU had set a deadline of Jan 2025. India said that let's look at June 2025, 6 months later. All of Apple's phones made in India should have the USB-C cable. Now this USB-C cable can be implemented by Apple on iPhone 15, where it is using, and all forthcoming models. But Apple produces the 12 to 14% of Apple's iPhone production in India actually happens between iPhone 12 and iPhone 15. So you have iPhone 12, 13, 14 and 15 being made in India. Now in EU, I think Apple is going to make its previous models obsolete much sooner than it does in India. So Apple is saying, I cannot go back to the drawing board and change the design of my phones and change the components of my phone to comply with this Type-C mandate for older generation phones. So iPhone 15 and onwards is fine, but 12, 13, 14, which are likely to continue being made in India for the Indian consumption market and for exports to maybe other emerging markets, Apple is saying we can't go back and change that. So if you offer, or if you put this on the table as a mandate for all previous models, then the PLI under which we have taken incentive from the government to manufacture X number of phones, that is likely to get hit. And Apple up until now had a target to up the production of iPhones in India from the 12 to 14% range right now, almost double it to about 25% by next year. So those plans, those targets could, like you said, hit a roadblock if the Indian government insists on a Type-C charging port for models prior to iPhone 15 for Apple.
Absolutely, but that essentially means, and it's a lovely consumer story, because it essentially means the multiple chargers that you have will all go away. You just need one charger to charge perhaps most of your devices, including your laptops.
That's right.
And a Type-C charger is most accessible. It's used on almost all Android phones. And if Apple also starts, changing its port to utilize an Apple Type-C charger or a Type-C charger, it makes lives easier
Absolutely
for everybody. So the diktat is to ensure that this is applicable from April of 2025 onward. May not happen by 25.
Yeah, I mean, I think for subsequent models it will happen because EU is a large enough market. Apple's market share in India has also grown from about 2% in 2021 to almost 6% now. So overall, it is in Apple's interest to comply with all these norms emerging from different bodies, different parts of the world.
But for the upcoming new models,
perhaps not change the design retrospectively for models which have almost lived their lives.
All right, and that is of course Apple's story. But moving on to a story that is not looking very good. Go First, an airline that has been battling severe crisis for the past many days, may not come back. It now appears that the lessors of Go First have now gone to court and taken the resolution professional to court for not allowing them to either inspect the aircraft or to physically once go and check them. What is happening here? What is the problem with lessors actually going and inspecting the aircraft?
I don't know what the problem is with that, Shweta. Ideally, if it is only inspection, only maintenance, lessors may be allowed. But what the Go First resolution professional, Shailendra Ajmera, is saying is that there was a moratorium put by NCLT, which was upheld by NCLAT when the lessors had appealed against the NCLT moratorium in the Appellate Tribunal, and the Appellate Tribunal had upheld the NCLT's diktat that the moratorium stays, which means lessors or anybody for that matter does not get access to Go First aircraft, Go First engines which are in Go First possession until the matter is disposed of one way or another. Either you find another buyer or you let the airline get liquidated. So lessors were definitely not happy with that, and then there was a petition filed in the Delhi High Court, and which is when the IBC rules were amended, and Delhi High Court had said that under IBC, any aircraft that goes into insolvency, voluntarily or involuntarily, should comply with the Singapore jurisdiction, which enables lessors to go and repossess their aircraft. Now, it was not made clear back then whether this new ruling of IBC made by Delhi High Court on October 12th would be implemented retrospectively, or is it only for future airlines that file for bankruptcy. Now, the problem is that the lessors are obviously very unhappy with NCLT and NCLAT and have gone to Delhi High Court saying that your October 12th order is not being followed by the Go First resolution professional, and hence this is contempt of court. So Delhi High Court has now told Go First RP that please file an affidavit by the 10th of December, and we are going to hear the matter on the 12th of December. So I think the RP has no choice but to file that affidavit and be present in the court himself or through his attorneys. And then
and in all of this, we do know that Go First moratorium has also been extended. It has been given more time because Go First could not find the right bidder.
Absolutely.
So the airline has a few more months to perhaps figure out what the next plan of action is going to be.
Absolutely.
Either it will come back or it will liquidate.
Very true. And in addition to that, Shweta, what the RP is also saying is that the Delhi High Court actually does not have jurisdiction over NCLT matters, and NCLT is the final authority on IBC. Now, of course, we have seen that there has been a 60-day extension. So now 4th or 6th of February, if I'm not mistaken, is the final date by when, Go First, some decision, some movement on Go First one way or another will have to be taken. Now, is that 60-day window all-encompassing when it comes even to the moratorium or not? I think will now depend on what the 12th December hearing at Delhi High Court really comes out with, and then we will know whether the moratorium is going to continue or not, whether Delhi High Court is going to prevail over NCLT, NCLAT's jurisdiction or not. I think that should become a little more clear on 12th of December, but we know for sure that lessors are very, very unhappy, and overall for the aviation sector, I think it is also bad news that airlines not making money in India collapsing one after another, going into bankruptcy voluntarily or involuntarily, and now it sets a bad precedent. In any case, for lessors, they would be a little more chary in lending their aircrafts.
Not so much now that there's been a change in the IBC
insolvency
so now with the
change in IBC, I think they should be a little better off.
Absolutely, lessors will be able to get back their repossess
true.
their aircraft, and I think that is good news for lessors. And DGCA also taking that rule and asking Delhi High Court to make it retrospective, which essentially means Go First will now have to allow lessors to repossess, or at least have a look at what's in the inventory as far as Go First is concerned. But before we close this bulletin, deepfake continues to be a menace. We now know that there'll be a fresh advisory in the making as far as the government of India is concerned on what should the social media platforms do when they come across a deep fake. But Priyanka Chopra has become the latest victim of a deepfake video. While it may not be as bad, in a very bad taste, but yet another deepfake video, yet another celebrity, and this vicious cycle continues.
So Shweta, when I woke up in the morning, I read news items about Priyanka Chopra's deepfake, apparently a video which has gone online where she's promoting one of her upcoming series, and also in the process talking about how much she earns in a year. But thankfully, when I tried to search for that video for the story that we are discussing today, that video was not to be found. So it sort of reaffirms the social media platforms compliance, at least right now, that any deepfake videos which are reported are taken down. So that video was not to be found. In fact, I was unable to successfully find that video online. So I really don't know what went into that video, but yeah, apparently it wasn't in bad taste, and it was really talking about her salary, which of course would be an eye-popping number and would evince a lot of interest. But that notwithstanding, I think now finally, yesterday, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, MOSIT, has come on record and said that in another 2 days, some sort of directives, guidelines would be issued for social media platforms where they would be asked to comply with those guidelines. Remember, on 24th November, Ashwini Vaishnav, IT Minister, had said that within 10 days, we will have a full-fledged, crystal clear framework to deal with deep fake as a menace, if not necessarily a full-blown AI regulation. But yesterday, Rajiv Chandrasekhar has said that 2 days from yesterday, which is by tomorrow, December 7th, hopefully, there should be some sort of a notification and there should be some sort of a clear-cut guideline on how social media platforms and online platforms in general need to comply with artificially generated synthetic content, deepfake content, and the action that needs to be taken by social media platforms and the action to be taken by Government of India if social media platforms don't comply.
Which includes a penal action.
Includes a penal action, perhaps.
Which is very, very important.
So I think government taking the menace of deepfake very seriously and moving at breakneck speed to draft some sort of a framework, if not a full regulation right now, to ensure that there is compliance by social media platforms.
From Prime Minister Narendra Modi to cabinet ministers, including Rajiv Chandrasekhar to Ashwini Vaishnav, all talking about the menace of fake news, talking about the menace of deepfakes particularly, and AI regulations, at least some sort of guidelines to be out by tomorrow. That's the timeline government has given to itself as far as issues around AI regulations is concerned. But with that, we have run out of time on the show. Thank you very much for watching.
Literally every major power in the world is gearing up with its own digital currency. And so is India. But India's UPI has taken digital transactions to the next level. So, with UPI already available, what exactly is the use case for the e-rupee?
This and more streaming on world's first news OTT. News 9 Plus, download now.
ChatGPT. It can generate codes and human-like responses through text, write stories, and do a lot more.
I work in a newsroom with anchors, researchers and scriptwriters, graphic artists, producers, video editors, camera crew. But does a newsroom really need them today?
All of us have to think about unique and distinctive value addition that cannot be automated or repeated or replaced by a machine.
ChatGPT may kill many companies.
A human has to be in the loop with an ability to control this.
Dark Side of the Boom. Streaming now.